Hi, everyone. So I'm Christina from Manning. Thank you for joining us. We have Courtney. We are joined by both of our co authors. We have Barbara. We have Laura. Welcome to you both. Thank you for being with us today. And of course, today we're exploring the book, Interview Speak. So I just wanted to quickly say that I think this book couldn't have come at a better time. Job interviews today look very different than they did even a few years ago. Candidates face new challenges. There are virtual interviews, there are AI driven assessments, there's an increased focus on authenticity and communication skills that I think go beyond just answering questions. Interview speak, I think, is timely because it gives people not just scripts, but really kind of the tools to show up, I think, as their best selves in a high stakes setting. And that's why I'm so excited for this conversation today. So perhaps we can just kind of get started at the beginning with the book itself. One of the questions that we had received was, what did you kind of wrestle with most while you were writing this book? And how did you resolve it?
Barbara and I came up with this idea, a while ago. And when I said to Barbara, I think there's a book here because we had been talking about it, she said, no, we're not going to write a book. And so I bugged her for a while. And she finally said, okay, we'll write a book about it. But one of the things we really struggled with was how much information to include. And so initially, Barbara put together sort of the meat of the book, like the translations, because our real focus was on when an interviewer says this, what do they really mean? Because unless you know that, you can't have a good interview. So Barbara put together sort of the meat of the book, and I said, yeah, that's great, but that's way too short. That's not enough. And so we struggle with, okay, so what do we add to make sure that it gives the most value for people? And so we ended up adding examples. Then we ended up adding information on mistakes and interview stages and how to deal with different kinds of interviews. So we added all that stuff. And then we had an amazing editor at Manning, and she helped us add cartoons, which we had not thought about cartoons, and sentence diagrams, which again, we thought, okay, this will help readers understand. And then we were super delighted when we got an early review from Manning. So Manning did an early review. And by the way, if anybody is on this call and was part of that early review, thank you. We got just great information. And one of the things they said was, we like it, but we want bad examples because we kept giving good examples. And that's how Clueless Clark was born, because we initially didn't have Clueless Clark in there. So we thought we want bad examples, but we want it to be sort of fun because job hunting isn't fun. This is not a fun topic, but we wanted to make it a little bit more enjoyable and easy to read. So those are sort of all the things we struggled with.
Was there a moment in writing where you thought, we're on to something bigger than just job interviews?
Yes, but not initially. I mean, initially, it really was only about the interview. But as we continued writing and adding more of those sections, like Laura just mentioned, we thought this is sort of a confidence builder, really, helping people feel confident in what they've done and who they are and showing up authentically in an interview and just feeling better about what they've accomplished and their own career trajectory. The book wasn't intended to be, here's your manual on how to improve your confidence in your career, but we are hoping and we believe, based on what we've heard from readers, that that's sort of a byproduct of this, which we couldn't be happier about.
And if I could add, to me, especially now,
Yeah.
I feel like we're helping people with their lives. That I'm talking to people that have been out of work for a little while and they're totally stressed or, really don't like their jobs but feel like they're stuck. And so I feel that by like opening up the curtain and giving information to people, we're helping people, we're helping their families. And to me, that just it's wonderful. Because if there's any way that we can help more people, we wanna do that. So it means a lot to me that we're getting this information out now.
And speaking of confidence, right? And perhaps some of these listeners, their confidence might be at an all time low. Or maybe you haven't had a perfect trajectory yourselves. How did your own interview failures or perhaps missteps kind of shape the voice of this book?
I wanna tell mine first because early on in my career, yeah, I messed up plenty of times. I can't believe some of the things that I did. And so, obviously, those mistakes helped me now because I'm thinking, if I had had this book back then, life would be so much different. Anyways, I'll tell you about one time. One of the common questions that we talk about in the book, of course, is tell me about yourself. And so I remember one time I didn't know how to answer that question. I remember starting off with, well, I grew up in New York. Now, no, no interviewer wants to hear that because, as we sort of say in the book, they're starting to put together, their shopping list because 'cause they're like, "Oh, this one's gonna be a long one." And I'm sure I did not take 10 minutes, but, I talked about I grew up in New York, and I went to school here, and I did this, and I just talked about stuff, that was easily accessible on my resume, and obviously, I did not get the job because I just sort of rambled. So, I've had plenty of failures, and while I certainly don't wanna say the mistakes, "Ooh, I did this one too," I have been there and done that.
And I had an experience where I showed up for the interview after being told, "Barbara, you have to be ready. This company is known for their behavioral interviews. Have your stories and examples ready." So I showed up, I was ready, and guess what? They hardly asked me any questions. They were up on the whiteboard drawing the new organization and how this department fit in and all this. And I just walked away going, "They didn't even get to know me." And that I thought of that when we wrote the chapter about different interviewers and how you have to be ready for anything. And I think the hardest interviewers are sometimes the least experienced and the most experienced. Absolutely, our own experiences help us think about what kinds of things to include in the book, especially when it came to adding things beyond the translations and how to answer specific questions.
Perhaps we can kind of zoom out a little bit from here and kind of take a look at the bigger communication skills, I suppose, that are shaping interviews. One question that we had received was, what's the single most kind of underrated skill in interviews that might not be obvious to most people?
To me, one of the biggest things that people don't realize is they need to show up as motivated and interested in this job, no matter what your skills are. And it's obvious to you. I mean, obviously, I'm interested in this job. Otherwise, I would not be here for the interview. But what interviewers are looking for are three things. Interviewers are looking for, can you do the job? And that's sort of like the basic skills. And you can see on my resume, I can do the job. But interviewers need to know, are you excited? Are you interested? Are you motivated? Because they want to know, if I hire you, you're not going to quit in 6 months. Or if I hire you, you're not going to get bored and make my life miserable. So that motivation, that interest is so important. And the third thing they want to know is, will you fit in with the culture? And so you need to do that. But I think selling your interest and selling your motivation is key. And if people remember, one of our insider stories is someone who was in an interview, and this was true, and he was asked, "Why do you want this job?" And he said, "Why not?" And it was a very sort of sarcastic thing, and obviously he did not get the job. So, learn the skill of selling yourself and the skill of really selling your motivation. That's what I would say.
As you were saying that, talking up your interests, literally, I'm reminded of someone who once said, I put bird watching as a hobby on my resume, and that got me the interview, and it actually ended up getting me the job because, the interviewee was, also a bird watcher, and the interviewer was the bird watcher. So, there was some commonality, right? And
Something similar happened to me. This cat picture on my wall got me a job because the interviewer saw the cat picture and thought it was the cutest thing. And she's like, once I saw that, I was like, oh, I gotta hire her.
What a wonderful story. And it's funny because we get questions about, how should our background look and stuff like that. And that's a great example of, again, making that connection with the interviewer. So they like you, so they're interested in you and they want to keep talking to you. That's wonderful.
I had a VP of marketing once tell me that the first thing he looked at on the resume is the bottom because he wanted to see what makes this person unique. What are their interests and hobbies? I mean, that's not going to get you hired, but it might get you in the door. If you don't qualify, you're still not going to get hired. But especially now, it's just so important to stand out and be unique and show your true self.
I love that. Let's talk about kind of the global workforce here. How do you see cultural differences kind of shaping interview expectations? What's the best way for someone to adapt without kind of losing their own authenticity?
I do global training. I have trained on cultural differences. I've trained all over the world. I've worked with a lot of different people with differences. And one of the key things, first of all, what you need to do is you need to pay attention to communication and nonverbal cues from the interviewer, knowing everybody is different. And again, sort of what Barbara was saying is you never know the interview you're going to get. You never know what their culture is going to be. You never know what their background is going to be. But what you want to do is sort of see where they are. And so, if I get let's say on an interview call and the person is kind of quiet and, just, a little soft spoken, I'm not going to come in like this. I'm going to take my authentic self. I'm still going to be, excited, but I'm going to take it down a little bit of a notch. And maybe that's the person's personal communication style, or maybe they're from a culture where they're just a little quieter. And so I'm going to be just a little bit quieter. And then maybe when I get on the next interview, maybe with a person who's going to be my manager, maybe they, have a little more of an excitable, cultural style. And I'm going to be maybe a little more excited. So it's really all about seeing who the person is and not making judgments or guesses, but just actually being there and just making some small adjustments. And one thing that comes up sometimes is, well, some cultures think that you shouldn't promote yourself. Some cultures think you should promote yourself. And so you always want to balance that sort of self-promotion, because you got to talk about what you're doing, with humility, that I'm a human being and I can learn and I can grow in this position. So again, those are things that you're going to sort of take a look at, but you have to be really aware of this stuff when you're in an interview.
And don't try and be someone you're not.
And speaking of authenticity, I think many people struggle with it, especially in the small talk phase, right? And so this other question that we got was, if someone is truly just kind of bad at doing small talk, what's your advice for flipping that weakness and really making it a strength?
Well, again, you can't try and be someone you're not because that's going to fail. But when I think about small talk, I think it's talking about nothing. And that doesn't happen in interviews. So, you can have your questions ready at the beginning to try and get to know them, or even ask a question like, how's your day going so far? Don't think of that as BS. Think of it as an important rapport building mechanism. So, I'm actually married to an introvert who hates small talk, so I know what this is like, and it's all about having questions ready to get them to talk and be ready to talk about yourself. And it's not self-aggrandizing and being arrogant about yourself and saying that you're the greatest thing in the world. It's being proud of what you've accomplished and being happy to talk about it. So I would redefine that, instead of small talk, call it rapport building.
In building rapport, I think that oftentimes people will come into interviews trying to be perfectly polished and really rehearsed. In rehearsing those perfect answers, I mean, what's the danger in sounding too polished?
Well, let me just say there's no such thing as a perfect answer. Let's get that clear. And again, I feel like I'm a broken record. It's all about being real and being authentic. So, yes, you've got to have your stories ready. And in the book, we show how to prepare, how to dissect a job description. So, you've got your examples ready, and an example might fit a variety of interview questions. So, you can kind of customize your story to fit the question. But if you're too polished, too rehearsed, they're not going to trust you. They're probably not going to end up hiring you, because how can you hire someone that you don't trust? The interviewers want to get to know the real you.
And the other thing I would add to that is, again, when you think about rehearsing, I almost think about memorizing. So you have this, script and you memorize it. And actually one part of the book, I think it's with Clueless Clark, he's going through a polished thing and the interviewer interrupts him and he loses his train of thought and he goes back and starts saying it again. That's really bad. And that's part of the problem. If you memorize stuff, then you can easily get off track. And again, it keeps going back to, what's the message that the interviewer is getting about you? Is it, oh, this person needs to memorize stuff, or, oh, this person can answer some questions for me? So it's important to be prepared, but don't try and rehearse perfect answers.
Kind of stepping back, I guess, from interview questions for a moment, how would you say we could dispel myths surrounding resumes, right? So even just to get an interview, we're starting with the resume. How can we dispel those myths kind of surrounding keyword stuffing or the one page only rule? Do you have any thoughts about that?
In terms of keyword stuffing, yes, it's important to have keywords in your resume. And by the way, there's no magic list of keywords. The keywords come from the job that you're applying for. But you've got to have the real experience to back it up. Because guess what? If you're putting keywords on the resume is what got you the interview, guess what they're going to ask you for examples about once you're in that interview. So I don't think of it as keyword stuffing. I see it as keyword matching. You've got to make sure the words on your resume match the words that they're asking for in the job description. And you've got to be ready to talk about any word, any line, even the last line on your resume, even the first few lines in the summary. You've got to be ready to talk about anything on your resume. And then with regard to the one page only rule, that applies to a few different demographics, really people who have less than 7 or 8 years of work experience. You need to fit it on one page. Creatives who have an online portfolio. The job of the resume is to get them over to the portfolio. So in that sense, it doesn't matter how many years of experience you have, keep it to one page. Otherwise, once you get beyond that number of years, it's okay to have 2 pages. C-suite people have 3 pages. And there are certain fields like medicine, academia that have a CV that's many more. I've seen 8, 9-page resumes. And that's quite common in other countries as well.
Interviews, I suppose, just aren't about tactics, right? They're about people, they're about emotions and, those little human moments that can kind of make or break the conversation. So let's dig into the most human and often most stressful, I guess, parts of interviews, those moments that kind of test character and kind of your resilience. We had a few questions here that kind of talk about this. The first one that came in was, can you share an example of a time when vulnerability in an interview actually worked in someone's favor?
It's interesting because when we think about vulnerability, we think admitting that I don't know something. A lot of times when that comes up in interviews, they think, well, I can't admit that. Here's the thing though. I have seen plenty of times when the person who gets the job is not the one that knows the most or is not the one with the most experience. Like let's say we're at the end, there'll be, 5 people at the end or 3 people. And we're always sort of wondering, who is the manager going to pick? And again, it's not always the one with the most experience. And I'm thinking about a situation where the manager picked somebody with less experience and said, you know what? I really like this person because they knew what they didn't know. So, like, they were asked about something, I can't remember exactly what it was, and the person admitted, "You know what? I don't know exactly about that, but I know I could learn that because I have learned other things." Basically, that was the answer. And so the manager liked the fact that they had the confidence that they could learn it, but they had the humility of saying that, "You know what? I don't know everything, but I want to learn it." It's okay to show, "I don't know everything," because it gets back to the BS that we see that you're perfect or you know everything. We see right through that. So it's okay in certain situations. Obviously, you're there because you know some things, but in certain situations, say, I'm just learning that, or I know I can do that. But be aware that we know that we're interviewing humans and we're humans too. And sometimes that's the part that makes the connection. So don't think about it as something bad. Think about it as something that could open an opportunity for you.
Sometimes the worst happens and your brain just blanks. How would you recommend handling those moments where your mind literally freezes up? Maybe you even forgot your first name. It just goes blank mid answer.
I've actually had that happen a lot when I was interviewing people. People would start out answering a question and then go blank and kind of freeze. Let's face it, everyone knows people are nervous during job interviews. It's okay. Pause, take a breath, admit, oh my gosh, I just lost my train of thought. Is it okay if I start over? Absolutely. again, everything we're talking about is about being real and being human. It's okay. It happens. I've had people say in interviews, I'm sorry, I'm just really nervous because I really want this job. I get it. That's okay. Take your time.
If you say, I'm sorry, I'm really nervous, again, that's a showing a vulnerability that the interviewer might be like, oh, well, that's really nice that they were willing to say that. And again, it creates that connection and it shows why you might be the best person, that you don't know everything and you're willing to ask and try new things.
What role do you think storytelling plays kind of in building trust, right, with an interviewer? There are some people who say, well, I'm just not a good storyteller. And if you're in that camp, how do you get better at it?
Well, you get better at it by preparing. But yes, storytelling is very important. And again, using the word stories makes it sound like, oh my gosh, well, I'm not a storyteller. It's about having examples ready. And then we give frameworks for talking through your examples. So the reason why stories build trust is because it's too easy to make up an answer. Here's how I would handle this, or here's how I typically handle that. Interviewers want to know, how have you actually handled that in the past? In fact, even if they ask you, how would you handle this? Your answer will have more impact if you say, you know what, I just had that happen last week. Let me tell you about that. So, talking about real situations with real problems, real actions you've taken, and real results and impact will always carry more weight than just kind of blue sky hypotheticals or generalities. That's why stories build trust. And how to get better at it: prepare your stories. Again, in the book, we talk about dissecting a job description. You can have examples ready and you can practice talking through them in one of the frameworks we offer in the book so that you get more comfortable and it starts to feel more natural.
Interviews aren't just about what we say, right? I think that a lot of times nonverbal communication matters too. And so one question we got here was, what's the most surprising nonverbal cue that interviewers really notice, would you say?
I don't know if it's surprising, but I think the most important one that is noticed is eye contact. And again, I know that could also be a cultural thing, but in the US, eye contact is important. People assume that if you're not making eye contact with me as an interviewer, you must be hiding something. So that's very important. And then in virtual interviews, the other thing I'll say is your hand gestures and your facial expressions are more obvious because they're only looking at, the one screen instead of seeing you in real life.
Has there ever been, something an interviewer said that, maybe during the interview process just made you realize, I don't think I'm gonna get this job?
I will tell another bad story. Again, I've had some bad interviews early in my career. I remember one time that I was in an interview, and so I gave, succinct answers. I gave short answers because I thought, my answers were clear. And I remember the interviewer saying, "Anything else?" And I was like, "Nope." And then, she asked me the next question, and then I gave my nice succinct answer, and she said, "Anything else?" And I'm like, "Nope." And, I'm like, "No, I nailed it." And then, then we went on and she did it again. And like, oh, the third time I was like, "Oh yeah, I probably should have had a longer story." But the point is, in our book, we give certain time, like we say, this should be a minute or this should be 2 minutes because you shouldn't go on. That's in most cases. This interviewer wanted more information, and she basically was saying, "I'm gonna give you another chance. Tell me some more information about it." And I was so focused on, "Yep, I gave the right answer," that I did not hear that. And instead, I was worried that I don't wanna ramble, I don't wanna go on too long. But again, you never know what the interviewer wants or who they are until you are sitting in front of them. And so what I should have done, now knowing this, is I should have, when I heard the first, "Anything else?" I should have said, "Yes, let me tell you a story about how I just recently did that." And I would have given a great example. And then I would have said, "Do you have any other questions about that?" And then would have seen, does she want more information? So, yep, I definitely did not get that job, but I did have a learning experience there. And then I was always really aware of how the interviewer looked, what their questions were, and especially if they asked, "Can you give me some more information about that?"
Yeah, I think people are so worried about having their answers be too long that they forget having an answer be too short is just as problematic. Because if the interviewer isn't really getting a sense of what you did and why it mattered, why would they hire you?
I think that's a really good point. For many candidates, I think what they fear most is having to explain why they left their last job, especially if it, maybe wasn't the best exit, right? So someone had asked if someone left their last job due to, let's say, workplace toxicity, what are some things that they could say when the interviewer says, well, why did you leave? And not make it sound like a piece of drama.
I would say do not use the words workplace toxicity. In fact, staying away from general labels is always a good thing because people won't really understand what you mean by that. So, when you're saying why you left your last job or why you're looking to leave your current job, that's a case where you can use what we refer to in the book as the negative sandwich. You could start by say something positive about the company or the team or the department. They're a great company, they have great products, but here's what didn't work for me, and use specifics. Don't make it about personalities, make it concrete. Here are the kinds of things that that job entailed that wasn't a match for me. That's how you get into the negative, and then you go back to the positive. So now what I'm looking for is this. So again, it's not that they're bad, it's here's what didn't work for me.
When you're the only, let's say, woman or perhaps minority, and we're thinking here specifically for a technical team or a technical interview, even in a panel, right? What do you recommend that someone like that does?
So I was typically the only woman in the room because I worked for global tech companies. And so my first advice is recognize that you're there for a reason and don't focus on the fact, oh my gosh, there are 7 of us. I am the only woman here or whatever it is. But recognize I have been invited to this because I have value, because I bring good questions or whatever it is, or because I will be able to assess this person well. So that's the first thing. And the other thing is that it's important, again, because you are there for a reason, to speak up and to have some questions or be able to ask something. And occasionally, when I've been in these situations, I have been interrupted. And so recognizing, you know what, if you get interrupted, it's okay. Maybe other people are getting interrupted. And if somebody interrupts me, I teach people this. I do too. I have held up my hand or I've held up my hand and said, "I'm not done yet," or "Let me finish." And I always say it, in a nice way, and typically the other person will stop. The other thing that I think is really important, again, if you are somebody that is not typical in the room, don't apologize for anything. I teach people a lot, stop saying "I'm sorry," and don't use weakening words like, "Oh, maybe," or "I'll try," or, "It might be like this." No, you want to, again, show up as your best self in this room because you're there for a reason and you want to be there to help them to find the best candidate.
Be confident, you know?
The other thing that might come up here, by the way, is upspeak as if you're asking a question, which some women, including myself, do. So instead of saying, and I handled it this way, make sure you're saying it as an affirmative statement so it doesn't sound like a question. I handled it this way.
Mhm.
So that's where practicing with someone, even if it's just a friend or relative, that person can help you be more conscious of if you have a tendency to do that.
On the note of presence and presentation, do you recommend that women wear makeup if they don't usually wear makeup? And I guess this kind of goes back to authenticity as well.
Yeah. If you don't usually wear makeup, don't show up to the interview as someone you're not. But what is important is being clean and professional and presentable, but show up to the interview the same way you would show up to work.
What are your thoughts regarding first impressions? the rapid automatic mental assessments that are difficult to change once they take root. Do you feel that they're mostly based on age, appearance, or something else?
Well, I mean, the fact is I'm not changing my age. Yeah, sure, I'd like to someday, but, somebody's gonna come on camera and they're gonna see, who I am. So recognize there are a lot of things you can't change, but there are plenty of things you do have control over. So, for example, again, in those first couple of seconds, are you on time? Are you early? Are you late? Now there are times that there's a technical issue and then you have to apologize or whatever. And you should say, I was on 15 minutes early. I was trying to do this. But being late is one of the things you notice. Also, do you smile? Do you look comfortable? Are you sitting up straight? So these are things, again, I have control over. The other one is what's in your background. Again, if it's video, Courtney, I loved your story about having the picture of the cat, but I have the opposite story. I remember interviewing somebody and literally they had a messy bed behind them. And I know I shouldn't have, thought bad things, but my first thought is this person is messy. This person doesn't pay attention to detail because they knew that they were going to be on a call with me. Now, they might have thought that they could put a fake background behind them, but as we point out in the book, that doesn't always work. And so even if you think you have a fake background, your real background might show up. So the point is, take control over the small things you can do so you show up as your best self, especially the first couple of minutes.
Let's move into some of the most practical kind of modern day challenges. Things like virtual interviews, which you just started talking about with the virtual backgrounds, and some salary questions. One question we got from a reader was, do you have any tips for virtual interviews that kind of go beyond the basics?
First of all, the content of your answers and preparation of those answers does not change at all, whether the interview is in person or virtual. But as Laura was saying, there are things you need to be conscious of: the background, the lighting, the tilt of your camera or screen. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I've interviewed where I was looking at their chin, because if you're looking down at me, that means I'm looking up at you. The other thing is people who have the ceiling fan going in the background and I see it and it's distracting. So you've got to pay attention to those things virtually and get there early, get set up. Those backgrounds don't translate across platforms. So you might have a great background in Zoom and then this is Teams and it's different. So you've got to set all that up in advance. But otherwise, there's really nothing different about the content of your answers.
My focus is always be ready for tech. And so I'll tell you right now, before today, I got on Zoom just to make sure, is my camera working? Is my microphone working? Things like that.
One of the toughest questions is probably compensation. And sometimes this comes up really early in the interview. What should you do if you're asked about salary expectations at the very beginning of an interview? And especially if you think that the salary may be too low. I mean, how do you kind of stay in the game?
This is one of my favorite topics because people don't want to talk about money, but I mean, we're here to make money. So let's make the most money we possibly can. Let's just go over the process. So if you're asked about salary in the interview, what you're trying to do is get past this point and make sure that they love you and give you an offer and then negotiate the salary. Okay. Because you can't negotiate salary here at this point. So if they ask, what salary are you looking for? You don't want to answer. Because if you say, I don't know, $50,000 and they're thinking $80,000, they're going to think you're too low and they're not going to hire you. If you say 100,000 and they're thinking 80, they're going to think, oh, you're way out of our budget. We're not going to hire you. So instead, what you need to do is say, so can you share with me what the range is? And honest to goodness, like 80% of the time, they actually will say, oh yeah, the range is X to Y. I mean, I have been shocked by that. And so they're really good about it. Now, if they don't, and if they press you again, then you can say, well, I need to know a little bit more about the job. Can you tell me more about this? But sometimes they'll press you again and you need to say, well, based on the research, what I've seen, the range for similar jobs is X to Y. And then just stop talking. Now, make sure it's a big range. Don't make it 50 to 55. Okay, make it 50 to 85. Make it 50 to 90 or something like that. Now, make sure that you will take the 50. Obviously, you want more, which is why you're going to negotiate. But again, the whole point is you're just trying to get past this as quickly as possible and make sure you get to the end. Because when you get to the end and they love you, that's when you can negotiate different things. That's when you can negotiate, even if the salary is not so great, you can negotiate a signing bonus. You can negotiate a stay bonus. Maybe you can negotiate a company car. So there are all sorts of things. Now, I do want to address the idea that the salary may be too low. Don't assume that because you don't know. But I will tell you one time I had an interview and they started right off and they said, probably the third question, listen, we just want to, be transparent. We want to let what the salary is for this job. The salary is X. And the salary was way too low. I mean, like crazy low. It wasn't 5,000, it was like $30,000 too low, way below that. And they knew it. That's why they said it. And so my response, and your response should be if they get way, way too low, is, huh, I'm a little surprised. Based on the research that I have done for similar positions, other similar positions are in the X to Y range. And then I just stopped talking because stopping talking is a really good tactic. And so they said, well, this is a new position and basically we don't really have the money and, we're just, and I said, I totally get that. And I appreciate that. The fact is that my range is high. My range is higher than that. My range is more in the, the external range. I am really interested in working for your company. If you go back and change this, please let me know. If there is another position, please let me know. And I said a couple of other things. And we ended the interview because it was not possible. Now, there was another time when I was interviewing for a nonprofit and the salary was a little low, but I was okay with it. I was able to work with it. So don't assume it will be. But if it is, make the decision, do I want to keep going? And really figure out, okay, can I negotiate this at the end? Or occasionally, like I did, just say, thank you very much. You know what? That's way out. I appreciate it anyway.
And it's sort of a judgment call because if you're in the ballpark, as Laura said, you want to get the conversation back to what do they need and how can you help with those needs? But if it's in another state, that's how far from the ballpark you are. It might make sense to just, say so and allow them to continue to talk to people who are willing to take that kind of pay. And by the way, once they start talking to those people, they might realize in order to get what they really need, they need to pay more. And they'll remember that you were real and honest with them. The other thing I want to mention, because I think this is really important, what Laura said at the beginning about getting the range out of them, your tone is extremely important because I've had people turn this into sort of a tit for tat. In fact, some of the books say, don't ever be the first person to reveal salary. You've got to get it out of them. But if it feels that way, you're going to annoy the interviewer. Never a good idea. But if you come from a place of sort of intelligent curiosity, look, I don't know anything about your budget and your salary range. Would you please tell me what range you've set forth for this position? So again, a totally different tone. And the other thing is, if they don't answer and they get back to you, we don't have a range. I've had major companies where I knew, of course, they have a range and a budget, but they don't tell you that. I have an HR director friend who said, we never reveal ranges to candidates. So back at you, bub. What range are you looking for? Then it's not about you. So I want to emphasize what Laura said. Based on the research I've done, it seems most positions at this level are in the neighborhood of X to Y. It's not about you and what you need. That doesn't come into play until after you have the offer and you're in a position to negotiate.
I think Laura's reminder of looking at total compensation is a good reminder because it might not be the base salary that you want, but it might be close if you're thinking about those other pieces of collateral. Taking kind of another step back, I know interviews don't exist in a vacuum. Certainly, they're changing with technology. They're changing with culture. They're even changing with workplace ethics. So one of the questions we got was, how do you see interviews evolving with AI and automated assessments that are, we're seeing them thrown into the mix?
It's funny. I've seen the whole job market evolve through the decades. Boy, that makes me sound old. But, now employers are struggling to keep up with the sheer volume of resumes they get. And that's why those applicant tracking systems were born. And now, again, it's very difficult to get people in the same room to schedule time when everyone is available. One of the things I noticed a few years ago was the occurrence of one-way, I call them one-way interviews, where you're talking to a computer, there's no human there. Now there's an AI human. But again, the content of your answers don't change. You still have to be ready to talk about what you've done and be prepared. And those systems change. Sometimes they allow you to redo your answers. Sometimes they give you a few seconds to think before recording. Other times they don't. But where that has helped employers is they now can send those links of you talking about yourself to all of the hiring managers at once, and they can evaluate candidates asynchronously, I think is the term. And then the other place where AI has become common is in evaluating those videos, but they're evaluating some things that are very interesting that humans might struggle to evaluate, like, counting up how many times you say or ah, evaluating facial expressions, eye contact, things like that. And AI might be evaluating the content of your answers. But remember, somebody had to program that. Somebody, the talent acquisition person or the hiring manager, had to say, listen for these words, which are not unlike what we talked about earlier, keywords in the resume. So again, if you qualify for the job and you have your stories ready, and you can practice talking in the mirror so you get comfortable talking about yourself when there isn't a human on the other side, you can pass that. And ultimately, you will be talking to humans because they're evaluating not just can you do the job, will you want this job, and will you fit? So that the AI does not replace the entire hiring cycle. It's usually just plays a part in the initial stages.
It's like a filter, really. Sometimes interviews cross into gray areas. How should candidates respond when an interview question crosses into, what we'll call the gray zone of inappropriate or maybe irrelevant?
We talk in the book, you don't have to answer anything that you feel is inappropriate. And I always think, just pause for a moment and really sort of take that in. They might ask you, I see you have kids and this is going to be a long commute for you. Is that going to be a problem? And I've been asked something similar at a job. What you want to do is recognize you need to address their fear. Their fear is, are you going to take the job and quit because you're not going to be able to do the hours? So you want to focus on what you can do and emphasize why you're interested and motivated. And so you could say something like, I understand what the hours of the job are, and this works very well with my schedule. There is no problem with that. I don't need to address my kids. I don't need to do anything else, but I need to address the real question, which is, are you actually going to be here at these hours? So that's what we suggest.
What's your advice for people who maybe aren't job hunting right now, but they want to keep their interview skills sharp? What should they be doing?
Think about what an interview is. It's a conversation where you have to listen, you have to answer questions, and you have to ask questions. So those three things take place in normal life. Practice asking people questions, listening, talking about yourself. You can practice being comfortable talking about yourself, which many people aren't. Again, be proud in what you've accomplished. And it's not just what you did, but why it mattered. Think about the impact you've had, and you can have that in all sorts of conversations, lunch with friends, networking events, and those skills will help keep your interview skills sharp.
I know we're kind of getting near the end here. Let's close with a few takeaways that everyone here can actually use tomorrow. If you could give the audience one kind of pre-interview ritual to ground themselves, what would that be?
there's no one right way. Obviously, I very feel strongly that you have to prepare. So you need to be prepared that the day before, get some good sleep. But right before, everybody has different ways that you can take deep breaths. You can meditate. You can do self affirmations like I can do this. You can play your favorite songs on loud. I know typically what I do is I spend like 2 or 3 minutes actually just meditating and breathing and centering myself. And I tell myself, this is going to go well. This is going to be interesting. I'm going to show up as my best self or something like that. So I would ask people, what has worked for you in the past? And if nothing has, again, try some of these things.
Imagine someone is reading your book the night before their dream interview. What's the one message you hope stays with them when they walk into that room?
I'm going to say two things. I think a theme throughout our book is there's no such thing as the right answer or the perfect answer. You've got to be real, be you, be authentic. And then secondly, it would be listen to the whole question and take note of what I call the heart of the question, the main point of the question, and allow yourself time to think. It's okay to take a few seconds. In fact, sometimes interviewers prefer that than, I got this. I've got my answer ready because I'm canned and rehearsed. It's okay to say, let me think about that. I haven't been asked that before. So allow yourself time to drink in the question, process it, think of not just the first answer that comes to mind, but the best answer, and then deliver it in a way that is natural to you, making sure, again, you're talking about what exactly you did and why it mattered. What were the results or the benefits or the impact of what you did?
Be prepared now because you never know when you're going to get your dream interview. So, I always say to people, get the book now, start reading it, get the information. So if you have your dream interview tomorrow, you're already partly prepared and you can jump in and you won't be so stressed.
Don't wait until you have a job interview scheduled to read the book. Read the book now so that you're ready when you get an interview. Because even if you're not looking, you might be called about a dream job that you can't refuse.
Mhm.
Barbara, Laura, thank you both so much for such a practical, I think, and ultimately human conversation today. And thanks for everyone in the audience for joining us and those listening even asynchronously. If you want to dig deeper and you haven't already purchased a copy of the book, check it out.
Get this book at Manning.com